I'm from the future. I came here in a time machine that you invented. Now I need your help.
My God. Do you know what this means?
Welcome to the Objective Secure podcast. My name's Mike.
Hi, I'm Emma.
And this is episode 19, Days of Future Past. And we have a very special guest on the episode today. It's someone who we have to blame for this podcast existing, basically.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much.
So can I please welcome a long-time childhood, now adult friend, Tim, to the episode.
Oh, thanks for having us here, Mike. It's really great to...
Well, before anything else, I should point out that when Emma and I were talking about having you on the episode to talk about all things Warhammer 40,000, and today we're focusing on the older versions of the game and where the game's come from and where we are today, she told me that you would never agree to do an episode on the podcast, ever.
I lost that bet.
I wish
You're
I'd put
sitting here, so...
I wish I'd put stakes on it now, but I didn't. So, yeah, I was really pleased when you just went, yeah, that'd be cool. And I just got to go and go, hey, guess what? So that was fun.
Well, I think I'm a little bit out of practice. I've had a bit of a break from Warhammer for a little while. The demands of work and real life and that sort of thing. I think any one of us that's been in the game for any time, we've all taken a bit of a break.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's just, your cyclic nature of life. You tend to move in and out of things over the years. But, you're the reason why we're here, because you introduced me to Warhammer 40,000 way back in, what do we work out? Like 1990, give or take?
Yes.
Something like that?
Yeah, 92, I think, maybe.
It was definitely towards the end of Rogue Trader. But actually, you know what, before we get into this topic, because we might as well do a bit more of an introduction first. So you did start gaming with me sometime, we're guessing somewhere around 1990-ish.
Yeah.
You were already playing D&D by then?
Yeah, and Warhammer as well, and Hero Quest and Space Crusade, all the gateway drugs.
Space Hulk as well, the original version of Space Hulk.
I didn't get to play a lot of Space Hulk. I played a little bit of it. There was also the offshoot Tyranid
Attack.
Tyranid Attack, that's it. And I've still got those scouts sitting in my bits box.
Do you really?
Yeah.
I think I've got about 5 of them lurking around here somewhere.
They actually made an appearance in my Blood Angels army.
I remember them. Yeah, I do too.
So they're still sitting in the bits box, and maybe one day I'll just rip them out. I'm working on rebuilding my first edition Ultramarines army.
Your old Beaky army.
The old Beaky army, which is the original miniatures from the original box set.
RTB01.
Yes, and
Rogue Trader box set number 1.
Mm-hmm.
I've got the Land Raiders. One of the Land Raiders you've given me.
Yep.
One is my old existing one. They are in parts. It's kind of like a project for me, like restoring an old car. And
I don't know which is going to be cheaper.
I think the car.
Probably.
Yep.
I think...
It'd probably be done faster too.
That was harsh.
Yeah. So that all got stripped, and I'm in the process of...
Well, let's be honest. You got sidetracked by some computer games, and you got married in there, and you're on fly in, fly out as well. So
and the roster changed to a 2-in-1 roster.
Yeah,
so there's not a lot of time.
So for those of our listeners who aren't familiar with the FIFO lifestyle, it's basically a situation where you work off-site on a mine site.
That's correct.
And it's, like 15 or 16 days on site and then 6 days home, something like that?
Yeah, it's kind of like prison, but in prison you don't have to do any hard work. So, they all make you wear orange. They feed you crap food.
And you get a 6 foot square cell.
The thing with prison is there's an end date. And
Yeah.
there's parole for good behaviour.
Well, the good thing about prison, you don't really have to work very hard.
So that obviously will have I don't remember when you were doing sort of 1 week on, 1 week off, you were taking stuff with you to site because obviously there's an incentive to bring it back and use it. And we were getting some games in fairly regularly during that period of time.
Yeah, well,
And then the roster changed and...
I think the roster
That's why.
changed, and a lot of the people who you gamed with sort of had offshoots in their life, so everything just kind of moved.
yeah.
yeah, that's the big killer of gaming groups is the real life commitment, especially when young kids come along or work starts to get serious.
Yeah.
We all tend to sort of, have to put the gaming on the back burner. Not like when we're youngsters, we could spend all weekends, over at mate's place and get those big games in.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I think there's peaks and troughs. So, when you're a teenager, before you discover...
Girls
Yeah, I was
or
gonna say,
your opposite
And
sex.
alcohol.
Yeah, before
Yeah.
that, then, you can peak and spend your whole weekend playing the games, and then you discover girls, and, you discover a special girl, so you spend a lot less time because you try and convince her that you're normal, and then she's committed, so you can actually let into the secret that
How
actually...
long was it before Mike let the cat out of the bag there? Because I remember you were around our group a lot when we were doing like nerd stuff. And it didn't
Oh,
turn you off.
no. So I
It's
had
already-
I was shifted out of there before any of the role playing started or any of that. So I got to go around for the pool party and
I was a freaking ninja.
yeah, that's it. But as soon as those role playing books came out, I think we've got to go now. So I didn't see any of it.
Oh,
I
what?
think until we were engaged.
Oh, no, it would have been before that.
Yeah, it would have been
You
before that.
Call them little men.
Well, it's just
Oh,
I
you're
still
playing with
call
your
them
little
that.
men.
She
yeah.
still does, yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
I say it with love and affection.
I don't know about that.
Let's say I say it with love and affection.
I will point out.
Complete malice. Warhammer's not your competitor. You're a part of the.
I will point out that she has played more games with me in the last, I want to say 2 years than you have, Tim.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like I think she's not preaching from a soapbox on high at the moment. So
There's a lot of admiration.
Yeah, no, I'm down in the trenches with you.
I mean, my wife uses my miniatures as cat toys, so I think you're quite blessed there.
yeah, that's okay. I can't argue with that. But
I'm just trying to imagine our bull mastiff playing with one of the Space Marines.
it'd last about 10
yeah,
seconds.
maybe not.
I think 10 seconds might be optimistic for it, actually. 3? Yeah, look, I mean, so you started gaming early teens at that point then, and you're a couple of years older than I am.
Yep, it all started with a couple of guys from the UK, and we all know that Warhammer originated in the UK. It's
Out of Nottingham.
Yep, and that's where these guys came from actually. So they were exposed to it very quickly, and when they emigrated over to Australia, they brought it all with them. So, of course, you want something to do on your weekends. You're not old enough to play alcohol. We started playing around with this game called 40K.
It was Rogue Trader back then.
Warhammer Rogue Trader. To me, it was pretty revolutionary. I didn't quite get it first off, but we played a few games of Space Crusade before that, and I loved these idea of these Marines in power armor and that sort of thing. It was quite intriguing.
I'm trying to remember. I think by that stage we would have had the movie Aliens. I think Aliens was, 1986 or something like that?
Yep. And if you look at some of the Rogue Trader art, I think that...
It definitely references that sort of alien-esque.
I don't know if it's some of the same actors. Artists. That,
like the concept type stuff.
His name?
Geiger. H.R. Geiger, yeah.
I don't know if... I'd have to look back in the Rogue Trader book to see if he did any work for him, but I don't think so. But
but there's definitely...
A lot of the work was... the early pictures, you look at the black ships.
Yeah. Oh, look, even the Gene Stealer, the classic Gene Stealer, is very reminiscent of Geiger's original Alien, or some of Geiger's Alien concepts anyway. Maybe not the genuine banana head, but certainly.
It came out very shortly after the movie. So we're all on the Aliens Marines high.
Yeah, look, I want to say that the original Alien was like 79 or like...
Yeah.
It was really late
Really
70s or very early 80s, and then... From
That
memory, Aliens was mid-80s,
That would've
86 or 87, something like that.
influenced it.
And, that period of science fiction, we'd obviously had the Terminator by that point. We'd had the original Predator was around the same period as well. So there was a lot of that sort of science fiction, marine-style stuff happening.
Yeah.
And then as kids, I say kids, probably young teenagers and teenagers, you all of a sudden get these toy soldiers that get to do that. That's kind of cool. So,
So that whole dystopian future history of our galaxy, you kind of enjoyed the link between the movies that you were watching and the game that you got to roll the dice for.
Well, it was really quite strange because we were sort of, as children, were raised in a science fiction era of hope and advancement of humanity and technology being the answer all, and this whole dystopian future, grim, dark thing was a new thing to us, and I think that's what picked us up. That's what got us interested.
I'm trying to figure out when Mad Max was, because I think Mad Max was an anomaly at the time for that dystopian style, when you actually look at what Star Wars was at the time. And
well, Mad Max 1 was...
that was another 80s series, wasn't it? The original trilogy?
You look at the early Games Workshop games that they released.
The Road Warrior. One was called Road Warrior. Yeah.
So they, I think that might have been a precursor for the Orky.
Look, I definitely think that, like any of the pop culture games from that era, there was... Do you remember Obi-Wan... Was Obi-Wan Clouseau... Oh, there was an Inquisitor in the Rogue Trader book that basically lifted a bunch of pop culture references. It was Obi-Wan Kenobi, Inspector Clouseau, Sherlock Holmes, and it just used all of the names, and he walked around dressed like Indiana Jones with a big flared cap and there was even artwork for him in the Rogue Trader book, and it was utterly shameless back then. Yeah,
well, they ripped... Well... I won't say that, but there was a lot of cross-pollination between games. If you look at some of the early versions of GURPS, I think I can remember seeing some very
I suppose the
similar
laws...
artwork and stuff in the old GURPS system.
Yeah,
which
even Macross, some of the Japanese manga stuff and styles there.
Macross
As they say, imitation's the highest form of flattery.
I think back then it was just a case of, hey, like copyright laws are kind of flexible right now. We can kind of do what we like.
I'm going with imitation is the best form of flattery. That seems least likely to get us in trouble.
Don't get me started on the whole BattleTech. Robotech and
MechWarrior
and Macross, copyright battles and sagas and the whole history.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes on in that period of time, and
I was experimenting with BattleTech as well at that time, and it never quite.
I was so glad you said BattleTech and not cocaine or something else.
I must admit that went through my head. So most teenagers are experimenting with drugs and alcohol. I was experimenting with BattleTech. I'm not sure if your parents are so proud or not.
Experimenting with, Vampire the Masquerade.
Oh God, that's a game system and a half.
You buy a game system with it, vain hopes that your mates will get into it and play it.
Sometimes you could force it. You just go, hey, I've got a new game, guys, we're playing this.
Well, you guys never did, and that's... and I've still got those rule books. I'm still waiting 30-odd years later. But that's the big difference between Warhammer, is we've always played Warhammer. It's always kept our imaginations. We've always spurred each other on over the years.
Yeah, and we got plenty of stories from the editions as well, because apart from 8th edition, I know you've played every edition, and I have certainly played every edition. A lot of them against you across the table.
We've had a lot of good games, a lot of good times actually.
Absolutely,
it's not just a game; it's it's a cliche saying that it's a lifestyle, but it is. It's much of our life, your life especially.
Yeah.
It's kept us gaming together. It's given us an interest together. It's something you wouldn't get just from drugs and alcohol.
No, definitely not.
Although drugs and alcohol
would probably be cheaper.
No. Well, what we might do is we might take a quick break, and then we're going to do a little bit of a tour through history through the 8 editions of Warhammer 40,000. We've probably got a bunch of different stories and anecdotes that'll come out of that as we go along.
And we're going to try and limit this to an hour, but
that never works.
No,
that's you and I can never limit it to an hour.
I was
We've got
just
another
about
guest.
to say, with the two of us, we struggle to keep it down. We've got 3 people telling anecdotes and stories here.
Well, we can always do it in parts.
Look, Emma and I have
happened a few
we've
times.
done that before. So.
Another epic saga. Get off my lawn, kids.
Well, we're going to take a quick break now, guys, and we'll be back in just a second. Right, so this is going to be I suppose it's not going to be a particularly accurate history. I mean, the dates will basically be right. But
Speak for yourself. I've done extensive research and have a page of notes here.
out of my head, most of it's out of my head.
None of my notes are out of your head.
We're getting old. Well, I'm getting old, and the memory's not as good as it used to be.
And none of us are able to focus on telling a linear story, so
No.
who knows how we'll go.
You know what's interesting, though? Despite age, I still remember some of the earliest games I've played with you.
We had some good times then.
And I think a lot of it, before we get into the timeline, is more about the association of... it's a positive association that you have, so the reason you remember it is because it was a point in your life that it actually meant something at the time. So,
yeah, well, I mean, it's one of those, remember the stripper back in Hanoi and the time we woke up with a traffic cone on our head. We tell very different stories. So remember that time you virus bombed my entire army and I had no army miniatures left, and the game took about 5 minutes. We still talk about
when you said stripper just then, I watched Emma's face go.
No, I was thinking, no, I do have the stories of waking up with a stop sign, and but okay. We had very different teenage years.
Yeah, you're a lot more normal than us. But,
oh, yeah, that's saying something.
But I think our good times. Normal people wouldn't even understand it, but some of the best times we've had, the Battle of the Church.
That was the third edition, so we'll have to get to that one in a second.
The Curious Haywire incident.
I think I actually mentioned that on was it a live? Yeah, it was. We got to ask that question about live stream favorite moments, and all three of mine were from either Rogue Trader or second and third edition. So
yeah.
Well, look, why don't we start off with Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader, or First Edition, as a lot of players know it these days. That was
1987, created by Rick Priestley.
Now, Rick is essentially the godfather, the god emperor, I suppose, these days, of Warhammer 40,000. And he, the original version of the game was very Mad Max in its stylings. Like the Space Marines had kill marks on their guns, and they wore bandanas and smoked cigars.
Field police.
Yeah, it was a far cry from the sort of grim, dark Gothic that we have today.
It was very raw and nowhere near as structured as what it is today. There was a lot left up to the player, and I think that's where we came up with it. What's the demographic for this show? Is it over 18? Or?
You can swear a little bit.
All right. Well, the Rogue Trader era interpretation of rules. Nowadays, it's more of a what you see, what you get, read as written.
Yeah.
Back in those days, you either fought each other, yelled at each other, or do what we did was have the stiff shit rule.
Yeah.
And the stiff shit rule was, you got a problem, you roll for it.
Yep, and if you don't like it, it's stiff shit.
And if you don't like it, it's stiff shit.
Yep.
And, you abide by the rules. And I think that's very different today. There's a lot of battling. And I don't know if that was just our house rule or something that, a lot of gaming groups or crews developed over time.
From what I've been reading, the first edition, or the Rogue Trader, was actually... So it was based on Fantasy 2nd Edition, but it was actually oriented more as a role-play kind of game with that kind of role-play feel, and less about being that really hardcore wargaming kind of game.
Oh, look, the original Battle for the Farm, which was the scenario they had in Rogue Trader, it's actually evolved over the years. That's the death of the Crimson Fist Space Marine chapter in the current fluff.
Got the cardboard cutout section of the back of Rogue Trader.
Yep, where you got to build the
Marines.
Yep.
Yeah, jeez.
So the Battle for the Farm actually was for 3 players, one of which was the Game Master, and then one played the Space Marines and one played the Orcs. And the funny part, like I say, the Battle for the Farm now is actually canon. And when the Orcs take out the Crimson Fist's Fortress Monastery, which I think was retconned somewhere around 5th edition, the remaining Crimson Fists actually retreat away from the Orcs and they fight at a farm.
I never made that link.
Yeah, so that's actually still in the canon today.
It's funny because I've forgotten all about that scenario.
But now I've said it to you, I bet you can still picture the Orc shooting the Space Marine, that piece of artwork.
Yeah, most certainly. But the other interesting thing is the Game Master, I guess you'd call it.
I don't think we ever did that.
No, we did a few times because I had the rule book and you guys didn't.
Oh, that's right. That's how we got shafted every game.
Yeah, so you guys played it out.
I noticed there's no denial there.
Oh no, straight out acceptance. Yeah, that's right. I was a teenager. I had the book. You didn't. Sucks to be you.
He was 2 years older than us as well, so he was bigger.
Well, Mike, do you have sealed armour?
No.
Do you have respirators?
I was playing Harlequins at the time. I was wearing spandex.
Yeah.
So
I really hope that was just the model.
yeah, it wasn't literal. Wasn't literal. Wasn't literal.
Good.
And like we were talking about this off air, we reckon it was somewhere around, like I say, 1990, give or take, that we actually started playing.
Yeah.
I haven't been able to find the original White Dwarf I bought. It was in the 130s, 140s of the original White Dwarf back in the very early 90s, I should say. And I definitely know we played Rogue Trader.
Oh, we did. We most certainly did.
I also remember how I went and actually bought second edition, but we'll get to that in a second.
Yeah, because we sort of transitioned second edition rules in with Rogue Trader, because none of us really had access to any new rule books. The compendium, if you could get it into Perth, was pretty rare, and you had to get in there when they got stock.
And the compilation was the other one.
And the compilation. So we were relying a lot on trading, photocopying a page out of a book to give to someone, or
well, the very first army that I got was actually a second or a third hand by the time I got my hands on it from you, and it was my original Harlequin army. It was 18 metal models.
Yep.
And it was the original Regiments of Renown box.
Well, I thought I was getting a pretty good deal, because I had no interest in these space clowns. No interest at all. What I was interested in was these original...
Space Marines.
20 Space Marines, Mike.
Yeah.
You got 20 Space Marines in this box set. And that was a pretty substantial army.
Well, my 18 Harlequins were 4,000 points under the old rules.
Well, I got them from this... The English guy one of the English guys I was telling you about, he wasn't interested in playing kids' games anymore. And so,
being as grown up as he was at 13 or 14.
Yeah, so I had to buy both to get the package deal. So that sort of mitigated the cost of getting those Marines. So
that $50 that I managed to con my mum out of that weekend is essentially why we're sat here.
Yeah, and that's great. I mean, it gave me an opponent to play against.
Yeah.
And that was my biggest concern. Is like I said before, you get a whole game system, then all your mates would bail, and you'd
spend
be
a whole heap of money.
Yeah,
exactly. And that was back in the days where there was no internet. You couldn't just
buy, sell, and swap via Facebook back then.
Yeah, you can't. Your access to game material was very, very, very limited.
Well, certainly for us here in Perth. So we had 3 game stores that you would essentially visit on the same day. They're all in the city. And we used to jump on the train on a Saturday morning and head into town.
Would make a day of it.
Yeah, and you'd go to...
It's 2018. We've still got trains.
Yeah, but none of these... Or there's only one of these game stores that still
Flying
exists.
trains,
mag trains.
Mag trains, yeah.
So the first stop was Valhalla, which was just across the road from the Perth train station.
Yeah. Then Simulations.
And then Simulations, which was literally upstairs above that. And then Tactics was a bit of a walk.
Well and truly.
But Tactics is still around today.
Yes.
It's moved, though.
It has moved.
Yeah.
It has moved.
Yeah.
But we used to trawl each of them looking for the rules and for miniatures in blister packs, because when you went in there, you didn't go in going, I'm going to buy this box set safe in the knowledge that the chances are it was there. You went in going, I wonder what I'm going to see this weekend. I've got this much money to spend.
What can I buy?
What can I buy?
That's it. I think some of the surprise, like as annoying as it is, the surprise of being able to pick up a pack of Terminators.
Yeah.
Or a blister pack of 3 Orcs.
I remember getting the first... it was... Admittedly, this is spun forward a little bit. This is late second edition when I got those Metal Wraithguard.
Yeah.
And I got 2... They come in single model blister packs for $8.
And that was the beginning of the Arms War. That's why I got the Terminators.
But that was... you needed 5 for the squad, and they only had 2 on the shelf. It took me about 3 months to get that squad so I could field it, because I was going in weekly going, have you got more? Have you got more? Have you got more? And I'd get 1...
It's really funny because we live now in an age of instant gratification.
Yeah.
Whereas, even if you order something from Forge World, you can still have it, generally
within
by
a couple
next
of weeks.
week.
Yeah.
Whereas to wait 3 months and just have to keep going and hoping, and you're potentially buying something, going, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to put this on the table, because unless they turn up in a shop, I'm stuffed. I
Yeah.
could have 3 of these and never get the other 2.
And the funny part about that is when you actually think about it, I remember the train ticket was $1.50 for the whole day round trip, and over 3 months I would have done
Back
that.
in my day,
I would
when
have
a
done
bob
that.
were worth a bob many moons ago.
But those $8 Wraithguard
That was expensive.
were expensive, and $1.50 a week over 12 or 14 weeks. On top of that unit wasn't actually cheap for me back in the day.
Well,
It's a long time ago. It's 25 years ago.
And
It's
isn't
really
it good
weird.
that we can sit here reminiscing back in the day
Yeah.
of early white. There's not many hobbies that have this kind of lifespan.
No,
Like,
that is true.
I've never really paid attention to much for 30 odd years.
No.
Continuously. You know, I've been
really
into all
hope your
sorts of-
wife's not listening to this.
At the moment, Warhammer's winning.
But you look at a lot of the hobbies people pick up, and they're not talking about them 30 years later.
No, that's true.
So that's something to say.
And if they
where
are,
the
you're
game's
not
at.
listening.
Yeah. Well, I mean that's something to say about the state of the game and how it's changed and
Yeah.
evolved over the years.
But it has changed a lot. So
Absolutely.
just pulling us back on topic. So Rogue Trader, that started with a book and then supplements in the White Dwarf
Yeah.
magazines. And in those, in the White Dwarfs, they did have the formal army lists that you could take out and you could copy and you could then
Yeah.
try and
and
create.
photocopies from your mates.
Yeah. Because that was okay back in
Yeah.
1987.
I think the
With
I mean,
your 20-cent photocopying at the library.
yeah.
15 cents.
They
actually,
were
at the school
doing-
library.
Do you remember there was the Rogue Trader book itself, and then over the period of the game, they released Lost in the Damned, Slaves to Darkness,
Lost in the
Here We
Damned.
Go, the Orc book.
Yeah, because that was
I'm not
leading
actually
more
sure.
into.
Here We Go, I think, was second edition.
No, it's
wasn't it?
definitely not because I've got it out in the dungeon.
Second.
I've actually got a copy of that at home too. 'Cause
There
that
were
was my
there were
first
2 Orc
supplement.
books though, because one of them had half the clans in, and one of them had the other half.
Freebooters.
Freebooters was the other one. That's
Freebooters
right.
was the other one.
And there was the Compendium, the compilation. There were 3 Chaos books. There was Lost in the Dam, Slaves to Darkness.
I don't remember Lost in the Damned.
That was like all the Renegades and Mutants. And then the other 2 ones were the Chaos Gods. But we also had a 5th Chaos God back then called Malal.
Geez, mutants were very different back
Do you
then
remember
as
the
well, 'cause you'd
D100
roll for
charts?
their- you'd roll for their mutations. So if you had an army of about 40 mutants, you got a lot of paperwork to take care of. I mean, there's
Yeah.
a lot less paperwork to deal with now. I'd spend all week writing up my army.
What's funny, we were...
Just for a game. Yeah, you wouldn't have a set army. You'd generally have a very different one. And
No.
you bought individual Marines,
Well,
and you equipped them individually.
Well, that's exactly
over
right. And I
Trader.
think the revolution was when they started releasing the White Dwarf compendiums, because we actually got
Yep.
the
Do you
something...
want the 10 books?
Sure.
Okay, so the 10 books, chapter approved book of
Chapter approved. That's it. I remember that
Book
one.
of Astronomicon. I'm not very good at pronouncing
Yep, the
those words,
Astronomicon.
sorry.
Yep.
Compendium, Warhammer 40,000 compilation, War Orcs, 2 Realm of Chaos, which was Slave of Darkness and The Lost and the Damned.
There you go.
Here we go, so you were right, I'm sorry. Freebooters, the Battle Manual and Vehicle Manual.
I remember the battle manual and the vehicle manual because they came out right at the tail end, and that was the...
Yeah.
So the Battle Manual changed
'Cause-
and codified the combat rules
Yeah,
there you go.
because the
and provided
first
upstats.
the first trial of those vehicle rules came out
In the White Dwarf.
and so that's the first time we saw things.
Do you remember that was the clear plastic template that you put over the
Yeah.
grid that you put over the picture?
Yeah, so there was acceleration, deceleration. We'll talk about this off air earlier
Yeah.
on. I couldn't even remember that.
It's amazing how much of it
Fire
comes
arcs
back
were
once you start
changed.
working through this stuff, though, because
Yeah,
I've just brought up a picture here from the 1989 compendium, and it's one of the first versions of the actual army list for Space Marines.
where
So-
they started to group them together.
Yeah, and
in
they came with
groups.
they
Yeah.
came with basic equipment rather than having to buy a human and then turn it into a Space Marine and then give it armor and gear and all the rest of it.
Well, you also didn't buy units, you bought individual Marines. So you could have a unit of 20, 30, 40 Marines
We'll see, like I
as
was
a single unit.
Yeah, you definitely. And the funny thing is, this book in particular revolutionised it because it did then start standardising the sizes.
Exactly.
So-
and it started giving them roles, tactical squads, assault
yeah.
squads. I
And
don't
it-
think we had Devastators at that stage yet.
No, there we go.
We did?
Yeah, we got
Oh,
Devastator squads there as well, and they came with so many missile launchers and so many heavy bolters and all the bits and
there we
pieces.
go.
So to give you an idea for those listening
It's
at
actually
home,
quite interesting looking at how the artwork's changed.
yeah,
over
it's
the
a
last
it's a
30
very
years.
it's a very different style of artwork if you want to go and Google it.
It's interesting because I was thinking about this on the way over here, and especially looking at the early pictures of the Harlequins and so on. There's lots of mohawks and there's lots of very big shoulder pads.
Very 80s there.
Exactly. Children of the 80s. And everyone knows that mohawks and especially shoulder pads were very important.
Very 80s, yeah.
Maybe that's why Space Marines have kept those big dome shoulder pads ever since.
But they've also managed to modernise them really, really well,
And keep the
instead
same.
of being a reflection of fashion, it's
now an iconic shape.
It's an iconic shape.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly.
So you had a similar profile back then that you do for 8th edition, and this is one of the things I really enjoyed about 8th coming out when everyone lost their minds over different movement rates. That's a Rogue Trader thing.
Also, another thing to take note of is the intelligence quotient.
There's 4 leadership values here.
Exactly, and that's stuff you don't see anymore.
So there's a move characteristic, a weapon skill, and a ballistic skill, which if you played 6th or 7th edition, the stats work the same way back then. Strength and toughness, I will point out the average Space Marine was only toughness 3 back in the day. It was only the characters that hit toughness 4. And even then, not the champions. You had to have multiple wounds before you hit toughness 4.
Didn't they rank champions?
Yes, you had a champion, a minor hero, and a major hero.
That's it.
And then it moved into initiative attack, wounds, initiative attacks, leadership, and then you also had intelligence, cool, and willpower. And each one of those things essentially interacted differently depending on the situation. So cool was essentially your ability. It was used for morale to see whether you fell back. Leadership was whether you regrouped. Intelligence was to do with operating tech devices, things like tarantula sentry guns, mole mortars, any of those really difficult devices.
And
cool.
Also came into withstanding hallucinogen
Yep.
effects as well.
And willpower was against telepathy and
and I think I remember the
horror and terror.
The hallucinogen, you'd roll for the effect, which
Yeah,
we
and
had
they-
a lot of fun for. I can't find it here, but it was absolutely hilarious. I think we had a lot of fun with that random point with the hallucinogen grenades.
Well, so looking at the lieutenant commander, who was the highest ranking Space Marine you could get hold of, at full points he was 94, and he came with a handful of bits and pieces. And the interesting part about this is he got to his options, and you had 2 choices. You could either spend 32 points and buy him a bolt gun, and a power sword, and a conversion field, and a bionic eye, and so on and so forth. Or you could roll on charts. And for Rogue Trader, charts were a big thing.
Yes.
And so the special equipment charts,
I like him having a bionic eye.
Well,
I think that's cool.
This is where it gets interesting because the charts here, so this particular character gets 0 to 1 rolls on standard weapons, 0 to 2 rolls on close combat weapons, 0 to 1 roll on heavy weapons, 0 to 2 rolls on grenades or missiles, and 0 to 4 rolls on equipment and bionics. And you paid depending on how many of those rolls you actually took. So,
mate, just another interesting point that I want to bring up, just before I forget it, so sorry there, mate, was that from memory, and it's not a very good memory, but I'm pretty sure some of those charts, you'd use a D100.
yeah, I'm just trying to bring one of them up
they were
now.
percentage dice rolls, and I think there was
Here we
also
go.
a couple of 20 dice rolls.
So
So it wasn't an exclusive D6 game.
So this was really interesting. So the standard weapon chart was a 0 to 1 up to a 120 result. Now, how you roll 120 on a D100, I don't know because it actually says it's a D100 roll.
Obviously, they don't want you to have a
shuriken catapult or a combi weapon.
That's
Chances
the
of getting
other
those are
thing.
very slim.
Yeah.
That's the other thing, the changeover they made from Rogue Trader to Second Ed, I think.
A lot of
Third Ed,
the charts started
combi
disappearing.
Weapons
Oh yes,
were
the combi
very
weapons.
different,
Yeah, they were.
Combi weapons now are a one-shot deal.
No, not anymore. They've gone back in 8th edition.
That's
So,
great.
and that's what I mean about a
but
lot of the current game
previous
being
editions-
reminiscent.
Yeah, well, the previous editions, Rogue Trader, you could buy a combi weapon, and it was a combi weapon, and you had to declare at the start of the phase what
What it was, yeah.
part you're using. And then they made it a single use, and I don't know how many people use combi weapons, because after that I never even bothered.
I actually wonder now, looking at these charts a little bit as well, whether there was a modifier that you could pick up for different characters, whether you actually could tip it over the 100 to get those different gear. But what's also interesting is these Space Marines, just to give you an idea, these Space Marines could be armed with auto guns, las guns, melter guns, shuriken catapults.
Oh, the status grenades. The vortex
Don't
grenades.
talk to me about vortex grenades. Jakero digital weapons.
That's in reference, people, to the tragic
the power,
Space Marine hoverboard surfer.
Oh,
with
look,
a
you
grenade
mean
vortex
you mean the
grenade.
result of 111 to 120 on the equipment and bionics chart, and the result of 99 to 120 on the vortex chart?
No, because you could buy them.
Well, before this, you could buy them.
Yeah, you could buy them in Rogue Trader.
Look, I will just very quickly talk about the equipment on bionics chart. So you said you liked them with a bionic eye.
Yeah.
So you can get a bioscanner, an energy scanner, a displacer field, a refractor field, a conversion field, upgrade your jump pack to a flight pack.
I want an energy field.
Bionic arm, bionic ears, bionic eye, bionic legs, bionic lungs, a stasis field, a friends-on dispenser, which was basically combat drugs, or a power board. Now, the power board is...
No, I like the idea of the energy scanner. I've just got this mental picture of a space marine with his 7 chakras lit up. It's perfect.
Rainbow Warrior Marines.
Like Empress
they
Children.
were a real thing, the Rainbow Warriors.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. And I think they deserve a good reassessment.
And this was so Nigel Stillman and Brian Ansell and Derek Norton were the ones who designed this army list from the White Dwarf. And there were a whole bunch of these guys who were really heavily involved through Rogue Trader, and they were really quite happy to take inspiration from anywhere and then move the game and do these really cool random things. The problem with the game itself was it took days to complete if you followed every little technical rule. And I think that's why they wanted a game master, so that you could
Try and keep moving
control the game.
Yeah.
I remember a lot of the grenades that you threw... what were the ones I was like? They're kind of like smoke grenades, but they were the Eldar versions. So they weren't smoke; they were fancy blind grenades.
Blind grenades, yeah.
And they had a 1.5 inch wide template. So all 18 of my Harlequins would throw a grenade, and you'd put 18 templates down. Mm-hmm. And then at the start of my next turn, I had to roll to see whether they dispersed, whether they got bigger, whether they got smaller, and where they moved to in the.
And Mum would get upset at us for stealing all her...
The cotton balls.
Cotton balls. I already got in trouble for it, I'm sure of it.
So, you know, that alone, that process of moving and rolling for 18 grenades at the start of the turn, we very quickly decided that Mike wasn't allowed to do that anymore. Or, sorry, I should say Tim decided that Mike wasn't allowed to do that anymore because it took too long.
Well, an 8,000 point game would last you 2, maybe 3 days. It
Yeah.
would last you the whole weekend.
Having said that, 8,000 points.
Yeah, but my 18 Harlequins were 4,000 points. So, but the fact that essentially each one of them, like when you go to the Harlequin list in this same book, every single one of them you had to roll for their equipment individually. And
we did insist at one stage that we all get together for our random rolls as well.
Yeah, that's because someone kept getting power boards and vortex grenades, Tim.
I'm just looking at that artwork for the Harlequins.
It's very different. Lots of mohawks.
I'm not
Lots of
sure
mohawks.
what on earth excited you about those, but I mean, I know it did, but wow.
Clown ninjas.
Yeah, Space Elf Ninja Clowns.
Space Elf Ninja Clowns. I mean, Mike's always played the elf and the Eldar.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know.
The artwork we're looking at
it.
is hugely 80s with these massive big mohawks and
Ponytails.
yeah, it's some very interesting artwork. But you know, Rogue Trader as a game system for like if we were trying to play it again today, I think you'd tear your hair out.
Well, I don't know. I think it depends what sort of game experience you want. If
that's
you're
true.
comparing it to modern day Warhammer, no. I mean, it's like I'm rewatching Star Trek Next Generation at the moment. It's not as good as I remembered.
That's why I don't ever want to go back and play Rogue Trader, because I don't want to ruin.
But there
how you remember.
There is an underground. There's a Warhammer underground, and these guys, they trade their classic miniatures. They play Rogue Trader.
Yeah, absolutely.
You just go onto eBay and look for Beaky Marine or Mark 6 Marine or original Rogue Trader era. You just type that into eBay. You'll scratch the surface of these underground Warhammer players that no one really sort of talks about. They're there. They're still there.
That is
they're
true.
Still playing. I ended up rebuying my copy of Rogue Trader because my original copy, of course, I cut up and used for artwork.
Yeah, for teen. Well, as soon as we got second edition, it was like, oh, this is useless.
Yeah,
Whee!
exactly. And I ended up going back to rebuy this Rogue Trader, and it cost me, I think, $80 or something, which is a lot more than what I originally paid for it.
Yeah.
I guess, counted for CRP and all that kind of stuff. So there is the culture, there is the underground group of these people.
Yeah, definitely.
They're out there.
I love the
They're
fact I'm
alive.
looking at some of these from the compendium, and there's not whole points. Like some of the grenades cost half a point or a quarter of a point. And I also love the fact that the Death Jester starts with a las cannon and then upgrades to a shuriken cannon. Now, anyone who's listening to this in modern day 40k would be scoffing and laughing, going, "My God, why would you ever do that?" It's because back in Rogue Trader, the shuriken cannon was better.
I mean, we did have those conversations back in the Rogue Trader days as well. It's like, oh, my army's 4.5 points over, and you're like, well, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And then if I won, it's like, well, your army had extra points, so
The funny thing was, those limits, if you were under points, that conversation still took place. Like, if you were 5 points under me, or vice versa, it would still be, well, you had 5 points more than me. Even though we'd agreed on a number.
Could have tipped the balance. 5 points.
So I'm actually looking at the Harlequins now, which we've just had a codex release for. And to give you the comparison point, the army list was never big for Harlequins. It's still not big for Rogue Trader. You end up with a high avatar, which has since become a Great Harlequin, which is now an upgrade for a Troop Master. The Troop Master was called an Avatar back in the day, and obviously this gets very confusing when the Eldar already had the Avatar of Cain, called the Avatar. Mm-hmm. You then had the generic Harlequin, which are now known as Troops, the core Harlequins. The High Warlock and the Warlocks are essentially the Shadow Seers of today, and the Death Jesters are still the Death Jesters. The Solitaire also remains the Solitaire, and then they used to have Mimes as well. What's really cool, and I really loved about the rules for this, is something that most armies couldn't do, was the Harlequins had no vehicles, but they had a rule here that's called robots and vehicles. And it says they're known to use robots and vehicles from time to time, painted in their distinctive bright colours and patterns. Robots are sometimes used in performance as well as in battle, being programmed to dance in their clumsy and amusing ways. Vehicles and robots are acquired by various means, but the Harlequins take little interest in the origins or state of repair. When they break down, they are simply abandoned. A Harlequin force is permitted up to D6 robots and vehicles. These can be of any type, taken from any army list, to reflect the fact that they've been scavenged from various places. Vehicles can be anything from a motorbike to a Land Raider. Vehicles and robots can only be fielded with a Harlequin force if the models are suitably painted. Full stop. And bedecked with appropriate banners. It is not permissible, for instance, to simply take a Rhino in Codex pattern scheme colours and Imperial banners and attach it to a Harlequin force.
I think that was the beginning of the Wissig rig.
And then it goes on and actually gives a reliability roll, so that you had to roll every time you wanted to use it, and it might break down on the battlefield.
And then get discarded.
Yeah, so I love the fact that this is a compendium.
I'm going to be honest, that feels a bit like, oh God, these need vehicles. We've just got to get the book out. Look, they can just have any because they just collect them. And
well, there wasn't even a range of Eldar vehicles.
No, they didn't exist.
Yeah, and so you got people rolling around with cardboards made out of Land Raiders made out of cardboard, which I had because I couldn't afford to make them.
In this same book, we just spotted a picture of it, was the original deodorant tank that was kit bashed.
That was the start of, well, for me actually, that was the start of kit bashing my own miniatures. I was a kid that didn't earn very much money, and
or none,
and so if you wanted a miniature, sometimes you just had to make it.
So this is what's interesting about this is actually Rick Priestley's little article here, and he goes on about how he built the Gravitac vehicle, and he basically goes step by step and shows it's a parts required: a flat hip flask type deodorant dispenser, 1 or more plastic spoons, a 1/2 inch or 1/3 inch screw, or a length of metal rod as a weapon from your bits box, or spare parts box it's actually called here, and tanks and decorative bits from your spares box. And he shows you how he puts this all together.
I quite like that. It's really encouraging imagination and creativity.
And then he goes through step by step and, drill a hole, cut this, do this, and then there's a painted version of it at the end.
Yeah.
And it actually looks pretty cool.
I think the style of creativity that we see now is a different brand.
Oh, it's very different, yeah. There is still the scope for creativity, but yeah.
I love the fact that this is from 1989, and it's the picture we're looking at, which I'll make sure we put in the show notes. The Gravitac vehicle in action with some of Citadel's new Space Marines. Now, bear in mind, this is a compendium, so this is a compilation of articles from White Dwarf published in 1989, which means these Space Marines are new at this point.
Well, the game had only been out for 2 years, so
2 years, and they've just released their first plastic set of Space Marines. So
those guys don't actually look plastic to me.
That one definitely is. That one definitely is.
I'm just going by the helmets.
That one's a metal.
Because there's the heavy brow ridge on the helmet, which you saw in the Rogue Trader era, and they started to pull the helmet more out into a smoother profile.
I reckon that one, and that one. There's 5 Marines in the picture. You can take a look at it in the show notes. You can have a look at it for yourselves. But it's certainly come a long way from where we are to where we were to where we are now, and they've done
the Aliens copy.
Yeah, look, there's a Zoids toy kit that they use to convert things, and there's literally an Apache-style helicopter that they've converted to literally just put Space Marine pilots in and
Actually, looking at that looks like the precursor to the Valkyrie.
Yeah, and it's really awesome to see this stuff, and I might try and grab a couple of screenshots to show some of these off to show where we started from.
Just referencing back to something you mentioned earlier on about the robots, am I wrong in saying that the robots in the game disappeared?
Yeah, they did.
Through second up to maybe
sixth was when they came back.
And I think the big part of that was maybe the Mechanum.
The Mechanicus list essentially disappeared from the end of Rogue Trader all the way through to about 6th edition.
And then I think maybe the Horus Heresy, the 30k thing, sort of brought the interest in robots back, and they started to build them back up.
The biggest problem with the robots from back in the day, though, is
they were random.
Yeah, how they moved.
Randomly.
You had to program them.
Yeah,
and you had to literally say
you
had to write down the programs at the start of the game, and there were preset ones you could pick from depending on the robot, and it literally measured how far it did, and then it turned, and then it did this, and then it did that.
So like the kids with coding now.
Yeah. Oh my god, it was complicated.
And that was sort of one of an additional thing for having a game master for the game is that you couldn't just trust your mate.
No.
to do the right thing in a highly competitive environment. I mean,
this is
see
the
a lot
difference between boys and girls, honestly.
Oh, we had some arguments. Didn't we?
Oh, absolutely.
Some hell arguments.
So there's if you do get an opportunity to get hold of the old Road Trader book or the compendium or the compilation, I really like the compendium because it's got some of the coolest old artwork and color schemes. You got Space Marines here in camouflage, which you just don't see anymore. The Red Scorpions were actually red as opposed to grey and yellow, which is what they are these days. Mm-hmm. So figure that one out.
Well, X-Men aren't in yellow spandex anymore.
Well,
so,
that is true.
Things move on.
There's one of the last squat army lists that ever existed.
Yeah, actually, we'll talk about that earlier on. And one of the Warhammer Lost races, everyone knows the squats. Well, mostly everyone, I'm sure. But one that I didn't think of was the Ratlings.
Yeah, the Ratlings sort of... I think they've always been around, but I think the level of use in the games has kind of slid up and down as the years have gone by.
That also brings up something else that I was thinking. Yeah, I was looking at one of your Eldar miniatures, and it had that cat, the Grox. Is it the Grox?
Oh, the Grinks.
The Grinks. And I remember in Rogue Trader you had flora and fauna tables.
Yes.
Remember that?
The Amble was my favourite one. The giant big anteater. Well, it wasn't an anteater. It looked like a cross between a gorilla and an ant.
And you and one of our friends, Matt, actually spent a lot of time making these styrofoam plants with
yeah, we did.
And if you went too close to them, they'll shoot the spikes out. In game. Of course,
we literally went and got cocktail sticks and stuck them in the outside of a foam ball. And then painted them green, and then painted the cocktail sticks red.
So
they're amazing.
Yeah.
That word amazing. It has so many different meanings, doesn't it?
So, you'd set this game up so it wasn't just army against army. You'd also have plants and other creatures you could put in the game.
The Catachan Devil, the original Catachan Devil.
There was heaps of them, and I think that slowly came back a little bit in 5th Ed when they started bringing up rules for minefields. And
we've certainly seen
like that,
little bits of that over the editions, but certainly Rogue Trader was the most complex in all of that stuff. I mean, I've just got a screen up here so Emma can see it as well. This is the Imperial Robots planning, like the programming grid that you had to use to make sure how far they moved and what they could do. That's that's all you've got. You've got no reference to how that works. You've just got this grid of information that you says start here, and then you have to follow this line through the game. It's
I think it was just so much trouble. No one even bothered.
No, I never saw a robot ever used because it was just too much hard work.
That being said, you couldn't probably find one in Perth at all.
Well,
either,
that is true as well.
Unless it was sitting in Valhalla's, nobody else wanted to buy it, and it was
Because
only
it's
stuff
too
left
hard
in
to use
stock.
that shade.
Yeah.
What I do like as well is that a lot of the names they used to use, like the Castellan and Cataphract and Conqueror and all those sorts of things, and the names that are being used back in the current edition of the game. There's one here called the Castellan, which they've basically it's a current model. The Mechanicus use it.
And just looking at it,
It's got the same sort of
pretty
Baymax
close,
dome head, the two-power
yeah.
fist, the shoulder-mounted gun.
they've managed to modernise it, but still use it. So it's sort of a nod to the old days, which I like. They've done a lot of that.
Yeah, so it's again looking at this picture from our point of view. I remember seeing a model of this, and it was the size of a Terminator. It wasn't huge.
Well, scaling was very different. I mean,
Oh, yes.
I get my old beaky Marines, I guess you'd call them. They're about half the height of a normal plastic miniature now. So it's a whole different scale. And you'd look at those original Land Raider Rhino kits.
Yeah,
I think most of us have seen them. We'll use them all the way up to 4th and 5th Ed. And you look at the scale of the Marines to go into this tiny little Rhino. It sort of ruined the game a bit that the scaling wasn't quite,
Well, I'm just looking at there's a whole bunch of kit bashes in this, and we'll move on to second edition in a second. But I do love the fact that there is a Dalek Space Marine here,
Oh, yeah.
and there's another one with a jump pack where they've literally taken a propeller from a plastic aeroplane of some sort and glued it to his backpack to make it into a flight pack.
I quite like it because I know that there's a lot of controversy with people who do have themed armies, and
Hello
so
Kitty army, yeah.
I have never seen a Hello Kitty
My
army.
Little Pony army?
Pardon?
My Little Pony Army.
I was just thinking of My Little Pony
There's a Hello
Army,
Little-
and
there's a Necron Hello Kitty army somewhere.
Yeah.
I've seen pictures of it. It's pretty epic.
I know there's Star Wars themed armies, and like you said, the My Little Pony themed armies, but really, it did start all the way back here.
Absolutely. I mean, this
So-
is stuff written by John Blanche for some of the design stuff when he was designing the original plastic rhinos and the Predators and things.
I struggle with the Star Wars themed army. To me, it's like I don't know, drinking port with lemonade. I mean, people do it, and
Esme Watkins loved it. No, is it? I can't remember her name. It was from A Country Practice, but
Of
still.
course, yeah, we're bigger country practice aficionados.
Yeah,
Sorry.
It's been a long time since I watched it as well, but anyway.
I mean, I'm not judging anyone, but I'm just
Well, you are.
yeah. Well, if you really love Star Wars, go play X-Wing. It is
Well, now there's
awesome
Star Wars
game.
Legion. You can actually play tabletop Star Wars. But I
That
think
would be really good to see. I mean, we are
Come
heading
to
off
show.
topic.
We've got it happening there.
Yeah, we do.
I'll definitely be there.
So yeah, look, Rogue Trader, it's suffice to say, was half of a tabletop game, half of a role-playing game,
Yeah.
mixed in with so many charts and layers and layers and layers of dice rolling that you had to be selective in what you did with it.
Yeah.
But you know what? It's some of my fondest memories of gaming because it was just the incredulity. Tim turning up to a game with what must have been 20 tennis balls cut in half and sprayed black, with us having no idea what was going on until he starts talking about how he's going to drop a vortex grenade every 10 inches, and he moved 72, and he had these two powerboard guys dumping vortex grenades, and it turns out a tennis ball was exactly the right size for the template. So he cut them in half and then sprayed them black so he could put them down and they looked like the vortex domes. He thought that was hilarious. We didn't. So
That was, I think, that was the other thing is you did have the opportunity to surprise your opponent, to really
that's because you had the
pull
book and we
something
didn't.
out,
Yeah.
to pull something out of completely nowhere that they didn't expect. And I think that was a big part of the game. Well, for me, it was coming up with something that nobody else would expect. Nobody expects a Spanish Inquisition.
Tim turned up with a giant plastic tube mounted to the top of a tank and went, "That's my orbital defense laser mounted on a tank."
And those days you could do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
jerk.
And I think that's not as prevalent these days with the metagaming going on, with the internet, with the
Yeah.
the exposure of tactics. You can't really rely.
It's
on
hard
the
to surprise. Yeah,
you can't rely on your opponent's ignorance anymore, because if you're playing the game, you've researched it, you've at least glanced at your opponent's or your regular opponent's army list.
You couldn't really do that in Rogue Trader because there's so many dice rolls. You just never knew what you were going to get.
It was so varied.
So much easier to cheat back then.
Yeah.
Well, the amount of vortex grenades Tim seemed to have were...
Yes.
I paid the points for it. You know, rock up to an army with 2
nobody
miniatures.
was allowed to count that.
Well, you rock up to a game with 2 miniatures, obviously something
Yes.
go down.
But the funny thing was that I realised it, Matt realised it, and Pete didn't realise it.
Yeah.
But I'll leave one final thought with Rogue Trader, which, before we move on to second edition, do you remember the Orc Battle Wagon, the original Orc plastic battle wagon?
Oh, God, that was
the rule for transport, how many models it could carry, was literally how many models you could pile on it.
Yep.
And if they fell off, they died.
Oh, fair enough.
So you could literally pile them on top of each other. The original kit actually came with like a mast for flags. So you would actually put the model on the base and then slide them down the flagpoles to hold them so they couldn't fall off. And then if you'd modelled your plastic orcs properly, they all had bayonets on their weapons. So you'd then have a base.
Oh my goodness!
And you know there were games where you'd have like 60 orcs coming across the table at you in a vehicle that's the size of a modern Rhino. Mm-hmm. And there were other games where
must have been very cozy in that.
Or there were other games where the dog would knock the table. And all the orcs would come piling off. And there was a huge argument because it was like, no, they didn't fall off for me moving it. They moved it because the dog knocked it off. That's not what the rule says. The rule says if they fall off, they're dead. That's not what
we came up with the stiff shit
rule.
rule.
Exactly.
They're off stiff shit. Deal with it.
So that was the original Orc Battle Wagon.
So I'm hearing some common threads with the games that we are seeing now, but a very different game.
Yeah, very, very
30
different.
years ago.
Very much more corporate now.
Yeah, it seems to be a lot more structured, whereas back then there were, it was, I guess, more, there were looser rules, and it was about interpreting it and people using their imagination more to be able to create the game that they want. And I guess that's kind of more of that role-playing style game as opposed to following these strict 14 pages of rules in this particular order.
It's less of a board game back then and more of a role-playing game.
Yeah.
And it was never really a tournament scene back then. I could be wrong, but I really...
certainly not in Perth there wasn't.
There wasn't the organisation that you got now with the communication. It'd be absolutely impossible to set up a tournament back in those days.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'm actually quite interested when the tournament scene started taking off.
I can fill that in.
Yeah,
because I was there. So then we go to second edition. Now, what was the date for second ed?
1993, and this is where Andy Chambers got involved, and we also saw the introduction of the codexes.
Yes. So
I felt so ripped off. I couldn't
You couldn't cheat anymore.
You couldn't cheat anymore.
No, I wasn't cheating. I could be creative.
So
tactically creative.
Matt and I got the latest copy of the White Dwarf, and we always alternated in buying it because we couldn't afford to buy it every month. So we took turns in buying it and shared them around. And we realised that the second edition had been released. And then we jumped on the train, went in...
Do you think that still happens? Sorry. But do you think that friends get together and still buy one copy between them? And
I doubt it.
Yeah, I know.
I still think the days of White Dwarf, even though they've tried to bring it back, I think the days of buying a magazine even is limited. I mean, we've got that many different forms of conversation.
Well, I suppose with the amount of stuff that they put out on Warhammer Community and that kind of thing
the digital connectivity you have these days is a far cry.
Websites and stuff. I doubt I don't think White Dwarf are doing too well.
Look, I mean, they seem to do all right in terms of what they do, because they do put some stuff in there that isn't anywhere else. But back then, it was your only source of information.
Yeah.
And
I know when we first started going out, it was every month on...
It was religious. It was, I need to go and find it because...
That's it. We had to go into the city so that you could go see Jason and you could get your copy of White Dwarf.
Yeah. So
new releases were a lot harder to find out, and part of our conversation was, hey, guess what's been released? Have a look at this.
Yeah.
So that's not really so much.
Well, I remember getting on the train...
Oh, no, that still happens, just not sharing around the magazine. Sharing around the Facebook pages.
Yeah. So that was the first of the Games Workshop box sets for starters. So this was actually Warhammer 40,000. The Rogue Trader name was removed, and it was a bunch of plastic...
Clarify this. This is the the game box set, not
Yeah,
box
yeah.
set miniatures. Yeah.
So this was plastic Space Marines and plastic orcs,
Mm-hmm.
cardboard dreadnoughts, because the cardboard dreadnought was the cheaper way of doing it, and we got some. From memory, we got some cardboard ruins in the box as well.
I think
Yes.
they are still developing the miniature as well.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember they released that, and they released Dark Imperium, which was the supplement set, which had all the psychic powers and all that. And from memory, it was basically the same time.
Yes.
And
yes.
we went in to buy it from Valhalla because we made a phone call and we called them and they said, yes, we've got copies. And Matt and I got on the train, went in, picked it up, but they didn't hold them for us. And we got the core box game, but we couldn't get Dark Imperium.
Oh.
And we were stood in Perth and we basically went through our pockets to find enough money to call...
Dark Imperium or Dark Millennium?
Dark Millennium.
Dark Millennium.
Dark Millennium, yeah. We went through our pockets.
I do like being able to correct you.
We found enough change to make one phone call from the city from a payphone, and we called...
Back when they had
Yep.
payphones. For you
Games-
people that don't know,
We'll post a picture
they're
in the
kind
show
of like the
notes.
mobile phone that we've got now, but they're attached to a cord and they're in a box, and you've got to go into the box and
And
pay
if you
the
were
money.
lucky, it hadn't been destroyed.
Yeah.
Yeah, or
and
hadn't
no one
been
had weed in there.
used as a toilet. Yeah, just Google payphones, and you'll know what we're talking about here.
So we called Games World in Cannington, and they said, "Yep, we've got a copy of Dark Millennium."
Oh, Games World, jeez.
And
And that's before a lot of games. There was no Games Workshop.
Games Workshop in Perth didn't exist, no.
A thing. Yeah.
and they said, "Yep, we've got one copy. We'll hold it for you." But it was Saturday, and they were closing at 5:00, and
You
we
gotta wait for the train.
got the train back to Cannington, and we ran from Cannington train station to Carousel, which is not a short distance for anyone who lives in Perth, particularly
young
not
and
at the
fit.
age of about 14 or 15.
Oh, no, you're younger then.
And we made
It's
it
a lot
there.
faster running when you're 14 than when you're 40.
Well, we made it there.
Little legs. Little legs.
We made it there, picked up the game, and it was awesome. We walked back to the train station, realised that the next train cycle meant that we were going to be an hour late from when we were meant to be picked up by the parents, and we got absolutely skinned alive by the time we got back to the Armidale train station, because the parents had been sat there for an hour waiting for us, and of course there's no mobile phones, there's no way of contacting anyone. So
but you had got your box.
we did get our game.
Yeah, and I remember when you fronted up with that, because I was still rolling with Road Trader gear.
Yep.
And
Now there's
First-
cards.
the first thought in my head was, well, bugger. You know, and then I spent the next couple of months trying to figure out how I can get the money to get this stuff together, you know.
Well, they also gave us it wasn't called Ravening Hordes, it was called something else, and it was basically a black and white pamphlet which gave basic rules for most armies. And then they started releasing the codexes. Like Emma said, the first two codexes were Space Wolves and Eldar a week apart. Craftword Eldar.
Bloody Space Wolves.
And, of course, it just happened at the time, the two armies that were being played the most was Space Wolves and Craftword Eldar, because Matt had picked up all the Space Wolf metal characters that were released just at the tail end of Rogue Trader.
He was one of them rich kids. He could afford all that stuff. That sucked.
And I was, we discovered Games World was stocking it at that point, which was a lot closer than the city, which meant that we could go and buy blister packs from Games World. So now we had another stop in the transition to see what we could buy.
That's 4 shops now.
It's 4 shops. It was awesome.
It was a day. It was a big day to get some miniatures. It's not like you just go to Games Workshop or anything.
No, it was
You
a
had to
day
plan
out.
and
It was
organise.
awesome.
Yeah.
So we played second edition for like 5 years or something. I think it was.
Mhm.
I
Yep.
think that was one of the longest.
Most of the editions have hung around sort of 4 or 5 years. I think 6th is probably the shortest.
Certainly got our money's worth. It was a whole different game changer, though. It was very much more structured. It was very much more
Yeah.
organised.
Well, there was the. Do you remember the cards? So the psychic phase was all about getting a deck of
Yeah.
cards and dealing cards out, and you'd cycle through the deck of power and dispel cards, and then you had war gear cards. That was the first introduction of war gear
Yes,
cards.
I remember the war gear cards. Jeez, yeah.
So you had some models came with their own specific war gear cards, and special characters often came with one, and then could have one or two more.
Yeah,
So
well,
you had Displacer Field toting Jane Czar and Invisible Karandras, and
well, gone were the days we could just buy a book and play the game.
yes.
Though that was an era.
You
of
basically
buying
had to
by then.
own the core box and the Dark Millennium box
Mhm.
on top of your codex,
Yeah.
because you needed all the cards from Dark Millennium, and
So even though they called it an expansion box,
You
really
needed
it
it.
was like core box 2.
yes,
Well, it's,
it was a way of not. I suppose you didn't necessarily need it, but it had all the vehicle rules, it had all the weapon rules, it had...
And this was before the time when you could Google it.
Yeah, exactly.
If you didn't want to get steamrolled, you needed it.
Yeah.
If you wanted to be a chump and all your mates making fun of you because you don't have the gear, then you...
But the funny thing is, like, I think we all chipped in to buy those 2 boxes because none of us could afford the $150 to buy the 2 of them combined back then. So we all kind of pitched in, and the rule book sort of travelled back and forth, and the Army List book went to school, like, literally on the Mondays following that. The staples got taken out of it, and it got ran through the photocopier like 10 times to be handed around the group so that everyone had their own Army Lists, because it was the only way we could do it.
Indeed. And I think that was my first introduction to corporate games workshop, of where the game would head from there on into the years. And I kind of felt like I was being inducted in some bizarre religious cult that told me what I need, exactly what I need to stick to my miniatures, and that I can't substitute things and all that sort of thing. I was sort of locked into a mobile phone contract, And
we're here 30 years later,
that's where
so...
I sort of headed up. And, I mean,
you took that contract really seriously, clearly.
Yeah, well, I mean, initially I had a problem with it because I felt like it was like stifling my creativity, and the game was too structured.
We just wore you down with persistence.
Yeah, well, I mean, I stuck with it,
Well, he'd spent the money on the model, so adapt or...
Well, it's one of those examples of hedonistic adaptation, no matter how bad it is, you eventually
keep
get
going.
used to it.
Yeah.
So, little men.
Here we are.
So, yeah, we played that pretty solidly over that 5-year period.
It was, and we didn't really have much else to do with our lives.
So
alcohol and girls weren't really a big thing in
that
our
was
lives,
for you around 95, because
Yeah.
you're like I say, you're a couple of years older than I am, and in 1995 I would have been 16 or 17. So you would have I know you definitely kind of disappeared towards the end of second edition.
Yeah, I discovered tequila.
So, Tim's talking a lot about discovering alcohol. He barely drinks at all.
Yeah.
So, he got it all out of his system during second edition.
Look, to be honest, I actually didn't see the transition from second to third because I basically had almost a full year off around that sort of 97 period.
Which
That
would have
was
been probably
studying
96
high
when you were
school.
high school.
No. The
HSC.
third edition came out 1998 from memory.
98, yeah.
I didn't see that box set release. So it was 97, 98. I essentially had a year off.
Is that when you started working?
Could have been.
Yes, you start working a lot.
I
look, I was-
year 12 in 98, so...
I don't know.
You're 2 years older than me.
I was working and going to TAFE and stuff and all sorts. So,
because that has a way of sucking up your time like nothing else.
but I suppose, like you say, at
Plus,
that
he
point,
had a really ununderstanding girlfriend then, so...
And we
there was
wore
lots.
you
There was
down.
lots of clubbing and stuff as well at that point.
Oh yeah, doing like experimenting with normal people stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
How'd that work out?
well, I don't do it anymore. So
You're playing Warhammer.
I play
still,
Warhammer.
eh?
Yeah. Fuck it, yeah.
Oi, language.
I didn't say it. I stopped
yes,
it.
you did.
That's right, we can edit that.
that
Or
becomes
not.
a familiar saying. We can edit that out. So then, second edition was, I suppose, very similar to Rogue Trade in a lot of ways. They simplified a lot of the rules out of it. They made the vehicles. I don't think they've ever settled on a set of rules for vehicles they've ever stayed with for more than one edition. It's always been a contentious point for them.
Well, I mean, it's a complex part of the game as
Yeah.
well. And, did I ever think we'd see flyers getting introduced in the game
No.
in, what, 5th ed? 4th? 5th ed?
I think 6th was they became actual flyers, whereas
Yeah.
5th ed they were kind of that flying tank
Oh,
type thing.
We never envisaged that back in, 2nd, 3rd ed.
Well, second ed though, I suppose the big part for second
It's
ed
an
was
infantry grounder pounder game.
it was, but it was also when Games Workshop finally kind of heavily invested in plastic cast, like injection cast plastic models, because we got we had the original plastic Rhino, the Land Raider were already out in Rogue Trader, but we got the Eldar Viper, we got the Eldar Jet Bike, we got the Falcon Grav Tank right near the end.
Well, that Falcon has never changed.
No, that Falcon kit's they threw an
It's
extra sprue in
still-
there at some point to give it the extra weapon options, but other than that, that's the same
Yeah.
kit from second ed.
Whereas the Rhino and the Land Raider changed completely.
Yeah, I think we had an edition in third. We got an update, or
they brought
fourth
out
maybe.
I don't know how you like to pronounce Chimera or Chimera.
The Chimera, yeah.
They brought that out 3rd ed.
No, I think that might have been second as well.
Second,
That might have been second as well.
See, that hasn't changed
And the Lehman,
either.
that and the Lehman Russ did get a face update in terms of making the kit easier to build. Sometime around 5th or 6th, but basically the shape of it hasn't really changed. But yeah, this was around the time when they were heavily invested in white metal, so they were doing a lot of the
heavy metal team. I remember that.
Yeah, we were getting a bunch of metal miniatures at the time. They were starting to dabble in plastics. We got the Snap-Fit plastic Orcs and the Snap-Fit plastic Space Marines.
And were the metals a separate, like, subcontract?
Marauder miniatures
that's how I'm
were. I think they were still owned by Citadel officially, but they were a separate brand, as it were, much like Forge World is today.
Yeah. Because Forge World has their origins there too.
Well, Forge World doesn't exist at this time. It was licensed out to Armorcast.
That's it. Because you've still got
I've still got a bunch of the Eldar Titans from the late 80s and early 90s. And at this point in time, we've still got Epic, which is a huge thing.
I've still got my Epic stuff. I've still got my Epic stuff sitting there.
So the Epic stuff, that's the
6mm
tiny
scale.
little
Yeah.
stuff.
So Epic's what do they call it now?
The release that's coming out very shortly is Adeptus Titanicus, which is the original Epic game was actually called Adeptus Titanicus, and it was Knights and Warlord Titans.
And that came out around about the same time as...
It was during second edition.
Second edition. And that was our first introduction to Titans.
Yes, it was.
Oh, what a fun day, really.
Only because you were...
Where were you when you discovered Titans existed? I always remember that.
Yeah. I had just had my first child when I discoveed Titans existed, because for some reason...
Because my Forge World Revenant rocked up.
And he got a Titan.
My Forge World Revenant rocked up that day.
I have heard people using children as Titan stand-ins. Put this bucket on your head, kid.
Yeah, stand there for 4 hours.
Child labour laws.
We also had Necromunda released in second edition.
Yeah, really? I thought it was third edition.
No, because it still used the same rules as second edition. You could literally pick up and put anything from second edition into Necromunda.
I always thought it was third edition.
No.
And look, even that's made a comeback now.
Yeah. And
that came out last year or the year before?
Last year. Necromunda was last year. And we're still... very early this year it might have actually been, now I think of it. No, it was last year.
Last year.
But, there were a whole bunch of those sort of spin-off games. Man of War was another one that was lurking around.
They've gone through a lot of those spin-off games, and they still do that. There was the battleships.
Battlefleet Gothic.
Battlefleet Gothic.
I think that was third edition.
Was that third?
I don't remember.
Third or fourth, something like that, maybe.
Anyway,
they're bringing out a big host of these things.
But I think the common theme for a lot of this was, though, that it was them experimenting with plastic injection cast models and what they could do with it and what they could achieve with it with traditional sculpting methods, then having these machined plates to turn into plastic miniatures. And I think
metal was for rich kids.
Well, metal at the time was still reasonably cheap, though, for them to purchase. So,
it's resin for rich kids. There wasn't much of it around.
No. So it's certainly, second edition was kind of paving the way. They'd taken out a lot of the complexities. They'd left enough to make it interesting, but not so much as it was unachievable for the average person to pick up and play. And they'd corporatized it so you could just buy a box, pick it up and play it. Mm-hmm. So it was a very clever move from a business point of view.
I think their business model, the game, I think, suffered a bit probably through third, fourth, and was starting to come back on the fifth. I think it was treated more as a cash cow business rather than a game. I think it suffered a bit.
There was certainly a period later in the editions where the corporate side of the business was directly impacting the game side of the business. And we've certainly seen that culture change in recent years, but... second edition was certainly on the rise for Games Workshop, and it was a modern application of Rogue Trader that was made available to the masses. And it was a game that you could play, much like HeroQuest or Space Crusade, as a standalone if you chose to.
Well, you could buy a kit of box of a Warhammer start-off box for Christmas, have it wrapped up, and they play with their mate then. And I think that's the sort of demographic they were going for and trying to push through. I guess they didn't realise, those young kids that got their game of Warhammer for Christmas all wrapped up would still be playing Warhammer this far down the track. So I think it's good they've changed and adapted and catered to their adult audience. I think 30k was a big step for the adult audience. I don't think it was aimed at the younger audience because of the lore and
yeah, well, the materials and all the rest of it,
and especially buying miniatures from Forge World. I mean, everyone knows resin's more expensive than plastic.
Yeah.
So
it's also much more difficult to work with.
Yeah, definitely.
And clean and all of that kind of stuff as well. So
it's the Johnny Walker Blue Label of miniatures, I think. And 16-year-old alcos don't drink
Johnny Walker Blue.
Label. They
not
drink
so much.
Johnny Walker Red Label, but maybe Black Label if they're stealing it.
I
from
don't know.
their parents.
Yeah.
So we'll spin forward to 3rd edition, which was
1998.
So 98 saw 3rd edition drop, which for us, we both kind of got back into 3rd at roughly the same time and went, holy crap, what's happened to the game?
So it was a much simpler game in 3rd edition.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'd say 3rd Ed was the golden age for a little bit in a way.
Well, 3rd Ed also saw them pick up the license for Lord of the Rings when those movies were coming out at the end of the 90s and early 2000s.
God, still got some Lord of the Rings
and
at home.
in terms of, they went public around that time. The share price was huge because they were riding the Lord of the Rings trilogy all the way to the bank. And it allowed them to heavily invest in plastic miniatures, which is when we saw the revamped Land Raider, the revamped Rhino, the Dark Eldar were introduced for the first time.
Very exciting. You got your Dark Eldar.
Yeah, I came back and went, why the hell are there these weird emo Eldar? What's going on here?
That was the start of a love affair that lasted a long time. I think Emma had a
bit
of competition.
She's still got competition.
That box right there that's sat not 3 feet from me has my Dark Eldar in it. So, 3rd edition was a really streamlined game. It was very cut down. You could play a game in a couple of hours rather than half a day. Or 3 days, which it was for Rogue Trader for you guys. And it also saw the rise of the competitive format. Certainly the Rogue Trader format that Games Workshop supplied. If you got in touch with them, they would give you the players packs full.
And I think the internet was easily accessible to most people.
It certainly started being accessible,
So you started getting the forums and the organisation that you see, around
Admittedly,
the game.
it was dial-up internet, and you had to sit in your kitchen with your family around you and take turns getting on the internet and things like that. But we kind of all had access to the internet.
You'd paint a miniature in the time it takes to load a screen, wouldn't you?
Yeah, pretty much.
That's how speed painting evolved.
So
and heaven forbid if somebody tried to ring you while you were on the internet, because
so
there goes that.
Phone lines for that.
Oh, you were.
You were a rich kid, yeah. So we had our first Rogue Trader endorsed Games Workshop tournament. That was 2002 here in Perth, Western Australia. I know that they were running in America and certainly in Europe and the UK prior to 2002. How much prior to 2002 I couldn't say for certain, but I know that March 2002 saw us in Perth run our first one.
I think, and I don't know about you, Mike, but I sort of looked on in a bit of envy to see how organised they are over in America and England and having their Warhammer tournaments and all that.
Yeah, which is why it was such a big deal when we had one here. I was like, oh my God.
And I think that's what's so important about, I think we're really starting, probably the past 10 years, it's really started to, develop here, and it would be a real shame to lose it. I think it's great for the hobby, and we need to see more of it.
Well, that first tournament, I still remember the restrictions had to be fully painted, had to be fully based.
It sounds harsh, doesn't it?
Oh,
back
mate,
then? It sounded harsh.
Like
More
it
than
was
3 colours.
Yeah, well, we were going, oh my God,
these guys are game Nazis. Jeez, how are we going to do this?
I think we probably had. Like, in my head, I'm going, there were hundreds of us. In reality, there were probably about 30 players on the day.
25, yeah.
It was a 2-day tournament, 7 games over 2 days. The 4 games on day 1, 3 games on day 2. 1,500 points was the number for 3rd edition. Mm-hmm. And that was a full-on weekend. Like, that was just bonkers crazy.
And this was in the days of, because I joined the Warhammer scene by this, not playing it, just through osmosis.
She didn't come and support me for my first tournament.
And you won.
I did.
So then I set the precedence that if you were
now
playing,
you never
I couldn't come because, it was lucky if I didn't come. It was really lucky if I didn't come. Yeah, so that was back in the days of painting things till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning and driving to events with them held together with shoelaces while the glue was drying and packing
Assembling them in the car park.
Assembling them in the car park, but actually packing all your models in shoeboxes and Tupperware containers and tissue and toilet paper and all your mum's cotton balls and things like that. So
it's interesting to see the industry that's going up around gaming. Like back then, you were talking about the holding things, or transporting with all the cotton and tissues you can find. And now
there's no
rocking
socks
around
left because everything's wrapped around your miniatures, and now
now Mike's rocking around with a flash foam case with wheel trolleys,
Kevlar wrapped and
design. So the industry that's grown up around the gaming industry
absolutely.
in the past 20 odd years, maybe 10 years, has just it blows me away. Like I don't have to make do as much now.
No, exactly.
Well.
Which
it's there
does
for you.
get rid of some of those elements of using your imagination and that kind of thing, but certainly made an impact on the economy.
Yeah, definitely.
And changed the way that people think about industry and the kind of jobs that you can have that are available.
Yeah, definitely. No, 3rd edition was also when you and I started playing, and that's the reason I had a painted army for that tournament, is we ended up in an arms race.
We did.
And this is where the church story comes from, because what was essentially happening at the time was we had a personal rule. It was nothing to do with tournaments. It was just a case of if it wasn't painted, you couldn't use it. And we'd set a points limit, and if you couldn't have enough painted models on the table to hit that points limit, stiff shit. Exactly. So if it was a 1,500-point game and you only had 1,300 points painted, sucks to be you.
And if you lost because you were down points,
sucks to be you.
Yeah.
And so what essentially happened was Mike would go and buy a squad of Aspect Warriors, and I'd beat Tim. And then a week later, Tim would show up with another unit, and he'd beat me. And then I'd go and buy another unit and beat him, and then he'd buy another unit and beat me.
So this was before the days of wives and children, when they were both working and had disposable income and could go and spend all of their money on new models and paints.
It was a matter of prioritising.
Yeah.
Yes.
I could have gone out and spent money and actually met someone, and I could have afforded to buy.
But see, a lot of the time we actually were doing those things on the side as well. It was just, instead of going and spending $5,000 on a car, you spent $2,000 on a car, and instead,
and I still only buy.
You really should have spent more than $2,000 on that car.
That car still lasted 2 years. You leave me alone. And I still made $2,000 out of it when I traded it in.
And then you went and bought a Titan with it. I don't know.
But yeah, we that sort of culminated just prior to 2002 with that tournament, because I at this point had now got a painted army, and Tim now has a painted army, and we decided to play kind of how many points have you got? And Tim's going, about 2,000. I've got about 2,000. Yeah, okay, let's do it. And Tim decided to build a new piece of terrain for that particular game. And he was hand-cutting the mosaic tiles for the floor of this church out of an ice cream container.
Hold the paint.
And it never, I don't think it ever got actually finished.
This was after my cardboard Land Raider, which
yes,
I'm
it was.
Still very proud of.
That was awesome back in the day.
I made a Land Raider out of a Fruit Loops packet because I couldn't afford a real Land Raider.
Because the plastic Land Raider that came out around that time was probably about $70 back in the day, and it's the same kit that we've got today.
Yeah, and
how much is it now?
About 120.
Okay.
Yeah, so
it might be less, it might be a little bit more. It's Australian dollars, so it's always a bit weird. But
that was sort of my entryway to that. Built my interest in building scenery. I know how much Mike hates building scenery.
Yes, I do.
But my interest, big part of the hobby.
He does such a good job of hiding his hatred for building scenery. I don't know how you've picked up on it.
A big part of the hobby for me was the creativity, as I mentioned before, and building the scenery let me showcase my creativity. You made this out of what, Yes,
Tim was very proud of that particular building, so he made sure that he was defending that building for that particular game. So
the church. This piece of scenery was a ruined church.
Yeah, so he had a squad in there, so I threw a squad in to dig him out. And didn't quite get them all out in one assault phase, so then he threw a unit in to back up the first unit, and then I threw a unit to back them up, and then he threw his captain in, so I threw my Farseer in, so he threw his a second captain in, so I threw my Avatar in, and then he threw Death Company in, and it kind of escalated to the point where we might as well have been playing on a 1 foot square, because everything piled into this huge combat, and I still don't know who won.
I can't remember.
But
I think there have been a few draws.
It could very well have been.
It could have been a draw.
I've got no idea, but we've said quite a few times that we need to rebuild the church, but we can't make it 12 inches square because that just didn't work.
I've got it on at the moment. Those actual same pieces that I grabbed, they're glued up to a 1x1 board.
Oh, cool.
And it's getting rebuilt slowly, but there's the same scenery there. And
Oh, wow, that's cool.
It's all built. So one day we'll get it done. You know,
I'll hold you to that.
Stop fly out work. I'll probably come back to it.
Well, look, that's kind of editions 1 to 3. Why don't we take a quick break, and we'll come back and cover the following years of the streamlined version of Warhammer 40,000. Well, as you can see from this episode's runtime, we've got a lot to say on the history of Warhammer 40,000, so much so that we've had to break the episode into 2 parts. So you can find part 2 in iTunes and links back to it on the website and in the show notes for this episode. I hope you've enjoyed this half of it, and you can follow the second half of the discussion in episode 20. Thanks for listening.
Okay, relax, Doc. It's me. It's Martin.
No, it can't be. Just sent you back to the future.
Oh, I know you did send me back to the future, but I'm back. I'm back from the future.
Great Scott.
You've been listening to the Objective Secured podcast. If you'd like to get in touch, you can visit our website, objectivesecured.com.au. You can find us on Facebook, Facebook.com/Objective Secured, or you can email us, obsec@optusnet.com.au. Thanks for listening.